I was gripping the cold metal rail on the bus, hunched forward, sweat dripping down my temple and sharp rivulets that soaked into the collar of my shirt. My fingers clamped tighter with every jolt of the vehicle, and the pain in my right side was white-hot, almost electric, radiating outward from a single point like fire licking my ribs from the inside. Each bump the bus hit made me gasp softly, the world swimming a little more each time. It felt like my organs were staging a violent protest. I didn't know what was wrong exactly, only that it was getting worse by the second. My knees wobbled beneath me, barely holding me upright, and a part of me wondered if this was how it ended, not in some grand, dramatic accident, but slowly dissolving into the background of a Lagos City bus while strangers pretended not to see me suffer. And then she said it, Rowena, my wife. Her voice cut through the low hum of the bus like a whip, loud and sharp enough to silence the conversations around us. Why are you sitting there? My mom's standing. Get up. She didn't even look at me when she said it, just gestured dismissively with her head as if I were an object out of place. Her mother, Miralda, was behind her, clutching her oversized handbag with a slight frown, not of concern, but disapproval, like I had somehow embarrassed her by being ill in public. I looked up at Rowena, tried to form words, but all that came out was a shallow, rattled breath. My stomach clenched, sweat dotted my forehead, and my vision wobbled at the edges like a flickering screen about to go black. The silence that followed her demand wasn't empty, it was full of judgment, curiosity, confusion. A few people turned their heads, some pretending not to look directly. A young woman near the front bit her lip and stared at me, brows pulled together in worry. But no one moved. No one spoke. Except him. From the back of the bus came a voice, old and gruff, like someone who'd spent decades speaking without caring who it upset. He looks like he's dying, and you're worried about a seat? The words exploded into the space like a firecracker, and the whole dynamic shifted. Whispers began in small clusters. Someone gasped quietly. I saw a man raise his brow and shake his head. It wasn't just me anymore. They all saw it, how wrong this was. Rowena turned toward the voice, defensive and annoyed. Mind your business, she snapped. But her words didn't land. They sounded hollow. Because the truth had already been spoken, and the moment was no longer under her control. That one phrase from a stranger had done what I hadn't managed in 5 years. It cracked the illusion. The carefully maintained facade of our marriage, the image of the supportive, smiling couple, was now crumbling in the presence of strangers who saw through it in seconds. And that terrified her. The old man stood, his back slightly curved, one hand gripping a cane, the other pointing directly at me. Son, do you need help? His voice, though stern, held something I hadn't felt in a long time, concern. No sarcasm, no judgment, just a question that saw me as a human being. I nodded slightly, my throat too dry and constricted to speak. My legs trembled under me, my whole body barely held together by will and a metal bus rail. Rowena hissed through clenched teeth, "You're making a scene." She leaned in slightly, as if whispering damage control, as if any of this was my fault. But I wasn't listening to her anymore. I was listening to the way people started to shift. Someone offered Miralda a seat without being asked. Another young man moved to the back, creating space near the door. The bus was moving, but I felt like I was standing still in the middle of a world that was finally seeing me again. It was a strange, out-of-body sensation, like watching myself from above. There I was, pale, drenched in sweat, shaking, and yet somehow still trying to hold dignity in a moment that had none. And across from me, the woman who claimed to love me stood with narrowed eyes, more worried about optics than my condition. The bus came to a stop at the next junction. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't say a word. I gripped the rail one last time, pushed myself upright with a groan I couldn't contain, and took one step, then another, until I reached the door. Every movement sent a jolt of agony through my side. My shirt stuck to my back, soaked through completely. My legs felt like wet concrete. But I stepped off the bus anyway. Where are you going? Rowena's voice chased after me, loud and sharp like always. I didn't turn around. I waved down a passing cab with a trembling hand, collapsing into the back seat the moment the door opened. I gave the name of a hospital I hadn't thought about in years, somewhere nearby, I hoped. And then everything blurred. The pain, the noise, the city melting behind the window. I vaguely remember the driver asking me something, but I couldn't respond. My body gave out halfway through the ride, everything going dark. The next time I opened my eyes, the light was harsh and sterile. I was in a hospital bed. My mouth tasted like cotton, and 4 bag hung above me, and a morphine drip was tapped into my vein. The pain had dulled to a distant throb, like a warning from far away. A doctor leaned over me, clipboard in hand. He looked serious. "You had a ruptured appendix," he said, voice calm but firm. "If you'd waited even another hour, you might not have made it." I blinked, my throat tight. My mind reeled, trying to process the words. And in that moment, something clicked. Not just about the illness, but about Rowena. About everything. About how I had been disappearing one piece at a time. And no one, not even the woman I married, noticed until I almost died. My name is Jonas Vale. I used to walk into rooms and know who I was. Used to carry tools in one hand and confidence in the other, fixing networks, troubleshooting servers, and walking out with full payment and firm handshakes. I used to wear my independence like a badge. No boss. No clock. Just skill and reputation. It was a life that felt simple and clean until I met her. Rowena. She walked into my world like a story I didn't realize I'd already started reading. At first, I was drawn in by her eyes, sharp, intelligent, always calculating. She spoke like every word was a challenge, like she was daring the world to keep up with her pace. I'd never met anyone like her. And when she smiled at me for the first time, I felt like I'd been chosen, wanted, pulled out of a crowd and told, "You're the one." We met through a mutual friend at a wedding, ironically, one I nearly skipped. She was the cousin of the groom. I was just fixing the audio equipment for the ceremony. But she noticed me. She made the first move. I remember thinking, finally, someone who doesn't need fixing. She had a career in marketing. She dressed like she had somewhere important to be even when she didn't, and she spoke with the kind of confidence that made you doubt your own. But I liked that. I mistook her dominance for passion, mistook her control for care. When she told me I could be so much more, I believed her. I thought she saw something in me. I didn't realize she saw something she could mold. In the beginning, it felt good. She was thoughtful in ways that seemed romantic, picking out clothes she thought suited me better, helping organize my invoices, managing my emails so I could focus on the real work. She brought structure to my life, or so I thought, and I welcomed it. What I didn't notice at the time were the little things that began to slip from my grasp. The passwords I no longer remembered because she'd reset them. The calendar appointments I was missing because she was handling my schedule. I didn't question the changes. I let them happen because it felt like she was helping. We moved in together after 6 months. Quick, sure, but I was in love. At least, I thought I was. She suggested we stay with her mother temporarily to save money for a place of our own. At the time, I was in between apartments, so it made sense. 1 or 2 months, she promised. Just until we got things sorted. Her mother, Miralda, seemed civil enough at first. Stern, a bit cold, but she cooked often and kept the place clean. I convinced myself it wouldn't be so bad. I didn't realize what I was stepping into. The weeks turned into months, and our talks of moving out became delayed by one excuse after another. First it was her job, then the economy, then some fictional savings target we were almost reaching. The room we shared in that house never really felt like mine. Her mother had a way of reminding me of that. Passive comments about men who live under other people's roofs, or sighing heavily when I used the main bathroom. At first, I ignored it. I tried to be patient. I kept working, doing odd jobs, servicing clients across the city. I kept trying. Then came the suggestion that we combine our finances. Easier for bills, she said. A single joint account that she would help manage. I remember hesitating. I had always handled my own money. But she looked at me with that impatient smile and said, "Do you not trust me?" And I didn't want to be that guy, the controlling, suspicious type. So I agreed. Slowly, my personal accounts faded. I started funneling payments into the joint one. She offered to do the budgeting, the monthly transfers, the bill pay. I let her. It felt practical, smart, responsible. But behind that efficiency was something darker. Soon I was asking for money from my own earnings. Asking. Like a child waiting for an allowance. "I just paid for your transport last week," she'd say. Or, "Didn't you just eat out yesterday?" I was working, but the money never felt like mine. If I questioned anything, she said I was ungrateful. Said I didn't understand what it took to run a household. She made it seem like I was lucky to have her managing things at all. And for a while, I believed it. Because that's the thing about control, it doesn't always show up as chains. Sometimes, It wraps itself in language that sounds like care. The space between who I was and who I'd become stretched slowly, until I barely recognized the reflection in the mirror. The man who used to wake up early, energized by work, now hesitated to even open his laptop. She'd check my emails just in case, offer to respond to clients to keep things professional. She began criticizing my work, suggesting I take on fewer projects until we figured out a better strategy. And then, one day, without warning, I found myself sitting idle in a house I didn't own, with money I couldn't touch, answering to a woman who treated me like an inconvenience. Miralda wasn't any better. She inserted herself into everything, questioned my food choices, critiqued my clothes, even suggested I was too emotional when I tried to set boundaries. They were a unit, Rowena and her mother. Two mirrors reflecting the same warped image of me, lazy, indecisive, ungrateful. It became easier to stay silent than to argue. And silence, I've learned, is how people disappear without leaving. Looking back, I don't know exactly when the shift happened. When the helpful suggestions became commands. When my work became theirs to manage. When I stopped seeing my friends, my family, my own self. All I know is that by the time I realized what was happening, I was already gone. A shell of the man I'd been. Tired all the time. Cautious. Afraid of saying the wrong thing. Of triggering one of Rowena's moods. I stopped asking questions. I stopped dreaming. I stopped fighting. That's how I ended up on that bus. Sick, broken, and still trying to explain my pain to someone who didn't care. That's how I learned that the body will scream when the heart has been silent too long. That's how I realized the person I had become wasn't the man I wanted to be. And it all started with love. Or what I thought was love. There's something cruel about pain that hides. The kind that doesn't leave bruises or bandage-worthy wounds. The kind that builds slowly, silently, until one day you can't breathe right or think clearly or stand up straight without flinching, not because of what's happening to your body, but what's been happening to your spirit. That day on the bus, the rupture in my side might have been the thing sending signals of panic through my nervous system, but it wasn't the only thing broken. I had been crumbling for years. It just took that moment to make it undeniable. I remember the way the sweat soaked through my shirt under the Lego sun, the way my back ached not just from the physical pain, but from years of carrying a weight I didn't deserve. My fingers trembled on the rail not just because of the ruptured appendix, but because I had been trained to tremble, to doubt myself, to second-guess every action, to seek permission for things I used to do without question. Somewhere between freelancing for international clients and watching my own wife hand me 2,000 naira like she was doing me a favor, I had lost the right to my own life. And the worst part? I hadn't even noticed until it almost killed me. When I look back, I think of all the small permissions I started asking for. Things that used to be mine by default: time, money, food. I had to inform her before I bought anything over a certain amount. I remember standing in a pharmacy once, holding a cold medication in one hand and my debit card in the other, calculating whether Rowena would approve the purchase. Not whether we could afford it. We could. But whether she would think I was being irresponsible with the household funds. Household funds that came from my own labor. I'd stopped seeing it as my income. Stopped referring to it as mine. It became something she managed. Something she rationed. And when my invoices cleared. When the clients paid for jobs I pulled all-nighters to finish, Rowena would skim through the payments like a hawk surveying its nest, immediately delegating the money to bills, groceries, savings, her mother's medicine, and whatever else she thought took priority. If I asked to keep a small portion for myself, maybe to see a movie, replace an old tool, or just buy myself something decent, she'd tilt her head and say, "Well, let's see what's left after I budget everything." After she budgeted. As though I had simply been a cog in the machine she ran. It was more than the money. It was the constant surveillance. My laptop, which used to feel like a gateway to the world, became a checkpoint. Rowena started asking for passwords, just in case, saying she wanted to help organize files or follow up on clients. But then I started noticing drafts I didn't write. Emails she'd sent without telling me. Once, she told a client I was unavailable for a month because we had family priorities, even though I had already committed to the job. When I confronted her, she simply shrugged. "You were burning out anyway," she said. "I'm helping you take care of yourself." Funny how people who hurt you always think they're doing it out of love. There were nights I lay awake next to her, staring at the ceiling, wondering when it had shifted, when her hands went from soothing to suffocating. When I reached across the bed, she'd roll away or mutter something about being tired. There was no intimacy left, just a schedule, a routine. I had become another item on her list to manage. And when I tried to talk to her, really talk, about how I felt erased, unheard, she'd roll her eyes or say I was overthinking things again. "You're too sensitive, Jonas. You always have to make everything about you," she said once after I brought up how isolated I'd become. I told her I hadn't seen my friends in months, that I missed them, that I missed me. She scoffed and said, if they really cared about you, they'd reach out. Maybe they finally see you the way I do. That sentence stung more than I care to admit, because it made me realize how much of myself I had handed over to her, like she was more qualified to live my life than I was. Even my physical health had become a battlefield. The last 3 times I tried to see a doctor, she'd postpone the appointments. "We don't have the money right now," she'd say, even when I knew there was enough. Or she'd say, "You're always saying you're tired. Maybe you just need more sleep." So I ignored the stomach cramps that had started 2 weeks before the bus incident. I chalked it up to stress, to diet, to anything else that made it seem smaller than it was. Because if I brought it up again, I'd just be accused of trying to get attention. And that was the pattern. Whenever I brought up pain, it became a performance. A performance she expected me to end quickly. Smile. Nod. Power through. Especially in front of Miralda. If I looked anything less than functional around her mother, Rowena would pull me aside later and whisper furiously about how I was embarrassing both of us. I once had a fever so high I was delirious, and Rowena still asked me to sit at the dinner table and not make it awkward. I sat there shivering through a bowl of pepper soup, cheeks burning, while Miralda asked if I was fasting because I hadn't touched my yam. So by the time I was hunched over on that bus, my body begging for medical attention, my wife's instinct wasn't to check on me. It was to keep the illusion intact, to protect appearances, to ensure her mother got a seat. Because God forbid I look weak in front of the matriarch who already believed I wasn't man enough for her daughter. The truth is, I had already collapsed long before my body did. That day on the bus was just the first time other people could see it. The rupture in my side didn't start on a Tuesday morning with cramps. It started years ago. With every decision I didn't get to make, every yes I gave to avoid an argument, every part of myself I handed over until there was nothing left but a man too afraid to even ask for help. That's why it wasn't just physical. It was emotional, psychological, spiritual, and I carried all of it silently until silence nearly killed me. After the old man spoke, everything on that bus changed. The air shifted, subtle at first, like the way a room feels just before a storm. No one said anything right away, but I could feel it in their eyes. The silence wasn't neutral anymore. It was weighted, charged. People glanced from him to me, from me to Rowena, and slowly, the collective stillness broke into murmurs, small voices, quiet judgments whispered just loud enough to matter. It was like someone had ripped the mask off a performance everyone had been forced to watch for too long. Rowena's jaw clenched so tight, I could see the vein rise near her temple. Her nostrils flared. Her fingers twitched where they gripped the handrail. "You're making a scene," she hissed at me under her breath, low and sharp like a blade dragged across glass. It was the same tone she used when I forgot to say good morning to her mother first, or when I dared to laugh too loud at a joke she didn't approve of. That tone was always her warning, her leash. And for years, I responded the same way, shrinking, apologizing, trying to fix the air she claimed I had poisoned. But not this time, because for once, I wasn't the only one who saw it. "No," the old man said, louder now, firm as stone. "You made a scene the moment you shouted at a man who looks like he's seconds from collapsing." I turned to look at him properly. He was tall, older, gray-stubbled face, worn cap, eyes that didn't blink when he stared you down. He wasn't dressed in anything fancy, just a simple shirt and trousers, worn at the knees. But he stood like someone who didn't need a title to command respect. And in that moment, he wasn't just defending me. He was calling the truth out of the shadows, naming it, making it undeniable. And that mattered more than I knew how to say. Then he looked straight at me and asked, "Son, do you need help?" Those 6 words hit harder than the pain in my gut. Not because they were dramatic or even particularly kind, but because of what they meant. They meant someone saw me, not just the sick man hunched on a bus, not just the husband with the loud wife, but me. A man in distress, a man in need, a man who hadn't heard that question in years. It was almost enough to undo me. My mouth opened, but no words came. Just a choked breath. I nodded instead, slowly, as if I had to move through molasses to respond. And in that small gesture, something cracked inside me. A damn maybe, or a silence that had outlived its usefulness. I saw her watching me. Rowena, her mouth twisted, caught somewhere between disbelief and rage. She wanted me to deny it. To shake my head, laugh it off, tell the man thanks, but I was fine. She needed me to pretend. Because if I acknowledged the truth, even to a stranger, it would unravel everything. Her story, her image, her control. But I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the old man. Because for the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. He wasn't family. He wasn't a friend. He had no stake in the outcome. And that's what made his voice powerful. He spoke up simply because it was right. Because silence, in the face of cruelty, is complicity. Behind him, I noticed a young woman, maybe early 20s, cornrows, earbuds dangling from her neck. She was glaring at Rowena now, her mouth slightly open, eyebrows raised. Another man in his 40s gave a soft TSK and shook his head. It was spreading. Awareness. Judgment. Justice, even in the smallest, quietest form. And Rowena? She hated it. Her eyes darted around, cataloging every face, measuring how badly the situation was slipping. "You're all being dramatic," she muttered. "He just doesn't take care of himself." I felt that. Not the words, those had long stopped cutting, but the desperation underneath them. That grasp for control. The way she tried to twist the narrative even as it unraveled in real time. She was playing a role, one she'd mastered over the years, the concerned wife, the burdened partner. But her script didn't work on a crowd anymore. Not now that someone else had stepped into the scene and broken the spell. The bus kept moving, but it felt like we were suspended, every jolt and turn somehow quieter, less intrusive. And I realized, with painful clarity, that this moment would stay with me forever. Not because I was humiliated, but because I had finally been seen. Because a stranger gave me permission to exist outside her control. I glanced back at him one more time, wanting to say something, anything, but the pain in my side was intensifying. Every breath was harder now. My vision blurred at the edges. I could feel my knees faltering. Still, I stood. Slowly, painfully, I forced myself upright, hand trembling against the rail. The old man reached out instinctively, steadying my elbow. He didn't ask again. He just nodded. That small act of support, silent, respectful, meant more than he could have known. As we approached the next stop, the driver glanced into the rearview mirror and asked, "You need to get off, sir?" I nodded once, jaw clenched against the wave of nausea crashing over me. The bus pulled up. I moved toward the door, wobbling with each step like my bones had forgotten how to carry me. Behind me, Rowena's voice cut through the air again. "Where are you going?" I didn't turn around. I couldn't afford to anymore. I stepped off the bus and into the sunlight, my head spinning, the ground beneath me feeling both too real and not real enough. I raised my arm weakly and flagged down the first cab I saw. The driver barely had time to ask where before I rasped out the name of the closest hospital I could think of. Then I collapsed into the seat, curling slightly to one side to minimize the pain, though nothing helped anymore. I could feel the darkness coming in. Slow but certain, like sleep at the edge of consciousness. But before everything faded, I thought about the old man's voice. "Son, do you need help?" That sentence, simple as it was, had torn open a truth I had kept buried too long. I had needed help. And for the first time in years, someone actually asked. The cab smelled faintly of fuel and peppermint air freshener. I barely noticed. I was folded over in the back seat, one hand clutching my side, the other bracing against the door as the driver weaved through traffic. Every turn was a razor across my abdomen. I tried not to make noise, tried to stay still, but the pain had reached a level where silence was no longer possible. A low groan escaped my lips. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his brows knitting together. "Boss, you day okay?" he asked. I opened my mouth, but only a dry gasp came out. My lips were cracked. My throat was raw. I forced a nod and croaked out, "General Hospital." "Yaba." Fast. He didn't ask any more questions. He just nodded and stepped harder on the accelerator. Outside the window, the world rushed by in smears of color, yellow danfos, faded billboards, the blur of people living their normal days while mine felt like it was ending. I pressed my forehead to the window. It was cool, a tiny relief from the fever raging inside me. Sweat poured from me like someone had turned on a tap and forgotten to turn it off. I had soaked through my shirt, and the smell of my own body made me flinch. It wasn't just sickness. It was fear, humiliation, abandonment, all clinging to my skin like a second layer. Rowena's voice still echoed in my skull, sharp, dismissive, entitled. "Where are you going?" As if I was the one causing a scene. As if nearly dying was an inconvenience for her plans. She hadn't followed me off the bus. Hadn't even called after me. No hands reaching. No apologies. No concern. She just stood there, arms crossed, staring like I'd betrayed her by choosing survival over submission. That image stayed with me, burned itself into the backs of my eyes like an imprint I couldn't blink away. I didn't know how long the ride lasted. It could have been 10 minutes or 30. But somewhere between the second bridge and the hospital gate, the pain overtook me completely. It was like someone stabbed a knife into my side and twisted. My head dropped forward, and I remember hearing my own breathing shift into something shallow and desperate, like my lungs were trying to breathe around a cinder block. Then the world blinked out. Blackness. Silence. Then beeping. When I opened my eyes, everything was wrong and bright and quiet at the same time. White ceiling. Fluorescent lights humming. My limbs felt heavy, as if someone had filled my bones with wet cement. My mouth tasted like metal. I tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. "He's awake," someone said. A nurse leaned over me, her voice calm and clipped. "You're in General Hospital. You collapsed in a taxi. You've had emergency surgery for a ruptured appendix. You're on fluids and morphine now. You're lucky." Lucky. That word rang in my ears. Lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I had been dragged through hell and barely spit back out. But then she said something else. "If you'd waited even one more hour, you might not have made it." That stopped everything. The air in my chest froze. One more hour. One more hour of trying to be the obedient husband. One more hour of pretending everything was fine. One more hour of sitting on that bus, listening to Rowena berate me while my body screamed for help. And I would have died. Quietly. Without protest. Without dignity. And I don't know why that thought felt more devastating than the pain itself. But it did. Dying wouldn't have even made a ripple in her world. It would have just been another inconvenience. She would have spun into a tragic narrative where she still came out on top. My hand rested on my stomach, and I felt the bandage underneath the hospital gown. The morphine dulled the pain now, but I could feel the soreness underneath, a raw reminder of how close I'd come to disappearing. I turned my head to the side. No flowers. No balloons. No concerned wife pacing the hallway. The chair next to my bed was empty. No one had come. No one. I stared at that empty chair for what felt like an hour. It wasn't just the absence of Rowena. It was the clarity that came with it. The silence was peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, no one was telling me what to think. No one was rolling their eyes. No one was questioning if I deserved rest. I was alone, yes, but I was also free. I closed my eyes and listened to the beeping of the monitor, the slow rhythm of something still working. My body. My will. Myself. I had gotten off that bus. I had chosen myself. Even if it was messy, even if I had collapsed halfway to safety, I had still done it. The nurse returned later and offered me water through a straw. I took it in slow sips, each one like a reward for surviving. She asked if there was anyone she should call. I thought about it for a long moment. My mind immediately reached for the familiar, for the default. But then I said, no, and closed my eyes again. Because I didn't want her here. I didn't want Rowena to come with her perfectly constructed concern and her carefully measured blame. I didn't want her mother showing up to sigh loudly at the cost of my hospital stay. I didn't want pity from people who watched me suffer and called it discipline. I didn't want apologies too late to matter. What I wanted, what I needed, was space. So I let myself rest. For the first time in years, I gave myself permission to just be. To be tired. To be hurting. To be still. Not because someone allowed it. Not because someone managed the schedule. But because I had nearly died trying to keep a life that wasn't mine anymore. That had never really been mine, if I was honest. So yes, I got off the bus. But more importantly, I stayed off. I stared at the hospital ceiling long after the morphine drip slowed to its final drop. I wasn't in pain anymore, at least not the kind they could chart or medicate. What was left was quieter, deeper. The ache of knowing no one came. Not Rowena. Not Miralda. Not a single call. Not a single message. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. Some part of me still believed she might show up, face tight with worry, clutching a bag of toiletries and fake apologies. But nothing. Not even silence disguised as care. It was just absence. Complete, clean, final. When the nurse asked again if I wanted to call anyone, I hesitated. This time not out of confusion, but because I knew the name before she even finished the sentence. Deo. It had been years since we'd spoken. Maybe 4. No fallout. No big betrayal. Just distance. He was the friend Rowena always hated. Called him loud, reckless, immature. But Deo was the only person who ever looked Rowena in the eye and asked, "Why does Jonas always look exhausted?" She never forgave him for that. We drifted after that. She made it uncomfortable to invite him over, and eventually, I stopped trying. One by one, my friendships became relics stored away and forgotten, as if my life before her was a draft version that didn't deserve to be revisited. But now, lying in a hospital bed with no one by my side and nothing left to defend, his name came back to me like a memory that had been knocking on the back of my mind, waiting for the silence. The nurse handed me my phone, and I scrolled through my contacts. My thumb hovered over the screen when I saw it. Deo. I didn't know if he'd pick up. I didn't even know if the number still worked. But I tapped it. He answered on the second ring. "Hello." I froze. His voice hadn't changed, still carried that same warm sarcasm, like he was always halfway between a joke and the truth. For a second, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. Then I said, "Hey, Deo, it's Jonas." There was a pause. Then his tone shifted completely. "Jonas? What the hell happened to your voice? You sound like you got run over by a cement truck." I exhaled, part laugh, part grief. Felt like I did. I told him everything. Not in perfect order. Not polished. But real. I told him about the pain, the bus, the stranger, the collapse. I told him how no one came. How I had been alone. And through it all, he didn't interrupt. Didn't ask the kind of questions that feel like accusations. He just listened. Then said, "Text me the hospital name. I'm on my way." I did. An hour later, he was there. I don't remember falling asleep again, but when I woke up, he was sitting in the chair by the bed, arms crossed, his old beat-up backpack by his feet. There was a plastic bag on the table next to him, juice, crackers, toothpaste, a pack of clean boxers. "Look at you," he said with a soft shake of his head. "Man, you look like you lost a fight with God." "Close," I mumbled, managing a weak smile. He stood, crossed the room, and handed me the juice. "Drink. You look like you haven't tasted anything but regret." I took the bottle, my hand trembling slightly as I unscrewed the cap. The first sip was cold and sweet, and it tasted like safety. "I'm sorry," I said after a long pause. "For disappearing." He waved it off. "You didn't disappear. You were erased. Happens to more of us than we admit." The words sat in the room like a truth too heavy to lift. He didn't push. Didn't ask about Rowena. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough. Years ago. I had just been too deep in the fog to recognize the people who saw clearly. When the doctor came in with discharge papers the next morning, I expected a long lecture. But he looked at me, then at Deo, and simply said, "You'll need rest. Lots of it. No stress, no lifting. Follow up in a week." Then he glanced at the bag on the table and smiled. "Looks like you've got someone looking out for you now." Deo helped me change into fresh clothes, slowly, without speaking. He didn't flinch at my unsteady legs or the way I had to grip his shoulder just to put on my shoes. Outside, the air was warm and too bright. The world felt louder than I remembered. I squinted against the sun as we made our way to his car. We didn't drive to Rowena's. He didn't ask if I wanted to. Instead, he took me to his apartment. 3rd floor, small but clean. A couch that had seen better days and a dining table that doubled as a desk. He opened the door to the spare room, bare except for a bed, a fan, and a folded towel on the edge. "You'll stay here," he said. "No rent, no pressure. Just stay until you figure out your next move." I didn't argue, because I had nothing to return to. And for the first time in a long time, I had a place to heal. He left me alone in the room, and I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. My body still ached, but something in me felt lighter, like I'd been pulled from underwater and was learning how to breathe again. That night, I slept without fear of what I'd wake up to. No footsteps outside my door. No passive-aggressive silence. No cold stares or weaponized sighs. Just quiet. Just a friend who remembered who I was before I forgot. In the morning, Deo slid a mug of tea across the table and said, "So, You ready to figure out what the hell you're gonna do next? And for the first time, I didn't feel dread when I thought about the future. I felt possibility, because someone still saw me. At Deo's place, everything moved slower, and for once, that wasn't a bad thing. There were no alarms set to someone else's schedule, no side eyes if I stayed in bed past 7. Just me, the rhythm of my breath, and the quiet hum of life that didn't demand anything from me. The first few days, I did little more than rest, listen to the rustle of Lagos traffic outside the window, and take my medication on schedule. My body ached, but my spirit, my sense of self, ached even more. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I made a decision that wasn't filtered through someone else's expectations. Deo didn't ask for explanations. He didn't press me to act before I was ready. He just let me be. But healing doesn't wait forever. It starts tugging at you. Quietly at first, then louder. I sat in the guest room one morning, staring at the faded blue walls, and realized I hadn't opened my laptop in weeks. It was still in a duffel bag, zipped at the bottom like a forgotten tool of a past life. But that life was mine, before I let it be diluted. Before I stopped speaking up, I reached for the bag, unzipped it, and there it was. My laptop. Scratched. Familiar. Waiting. The screen booted up with a low hum, and I held my breath as it flickered to life. A wave of memories crashed into me: project folders, client messages, old invoices. Things I used to handle confidently, instinctively. I ran my fingers across the keys. Something stirred in me. Not pride exactly, but potential. I was still in there somewhere. That night, I emailed a few old clients, apologizing for disappearing, letting them know I'd had a medical emergency, asking if they still needed freelance work done. I didn't expect replies. But by morning, 3 of them had already responded. Warm, patient, understanding. Glad you're okay, one said. Take your time, another replied. And one simply wrote, we've been waiting. Let us know when you're ready. I sat back in my chair, stunned. After everything, they hadn't forgotten me. More importantly, they hadn't replaced me. The next step wasn't as easy, but it was necessary. I called a lawyer. Her name was Ms. Adiz Mbatha, recommended by a former client who specialized in civil matters, including marital and financial abuse. Just saying the words felt surreal. Abuse. I had spent so long minimizing what had happened, telling myself Rowena was just particular, that Miralda was just old-fashioned. But it wasn't cultural. It wasn't about personality. It was control. It was theft. And it had almost killed me. When Ms. Mbatha picked up, her voice was firm but kind. I explained everything. The financial control, the withheld payments, the fact that I'd been the primary earner but hadn't had access to my own money. I told her how Rowena had intercepted client communications, how she'd made me dependent on her for daily expenses, how she never came to the hospital even after I nearly died. There was a long pause. Then she said, this isn't just divorce we're talking about. It's restitution. The word landed hard. Restitution. Not just escape. Not just walking away with my wounds, but being made whole. I met with her 2 days later at her office. She wore a dark blue suit and glasses that didn't hide how sharply her eyes studied every detail. She took notes, asked direct questions. And when I showed her the digital records I'd recovered from my email messages, payment receipts, voice notes Rowena left while ranting about how much she sacrificed to manage my life, Ms. Mbatha nodded and said, we'll move forward carefully. You'll need therapy documentation as well. Can I refer you to someone? I said yes, because I was done pretending I could fix this alone. Back at Deo's apartment, he noticed the shift in me. I was up earlier. Her number flashed on the screen while I was finishing up a project estimate. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. Where are you? She demanded the moment I picked up. No greeting. No concern. Just that tone, entitled, impatient, as if I were a disobedient pet gone missing. My mother is asking, you just left? After everything we've done for you. Everything they had done for me. I exhaled slowly. My voice didn't shake this time. I almost died, Rowena, I said. And you yelled at me because your mother needed a seat. There was a pause. Not shock, just calculation. You're overreacting, she said flatly. I didn't respond. Instead, I moved my thumb to the red button and ended the call. No screaming. No debate. Just a click. It was the most powerful sound I'd heard in years. Because that moment wasn't just about ending a call. It was about ending a pattern. I'd spent years trying to explain myself to someone who was never listening. Now, I didn't need her to hear me. I needed me to hear me. That day, I wrote the final line of a message to my lawyer and hit send. We were moving forward with the divorce, the financial recovery, the documentation of every time she had withheld something I had earned. It was terrifying, but it was also mine. And for the first time in a very long time, so was my voice. The first envelope I got from Ms. Mbatha was thick. It held copies of everything. Our official petition for divorce, a detailed summary of Rowena's financial control, the supporting records, and a formal request for the court to evaluate emotional abuse and economic coercion. It felt heavier than it looked, like holding years of my life on paper. Paper that finally spoke the truth I had swallowed for too long. Signing my name at the bottom of each form was like exhaling after years of breathing in silence. With each stroke of the pen, I felt the grip she had on my life loosening. Miss Mbatha had reviewed everything with her calm, razor-sharp precision. "We'll keep it clean," she said, tapping a finger against the edge of her legal pad. "But we won't play small." She'll push back. Be ready for that. Rowena's first response came within a week of her receiving the documents. Not through a lawyer, at least not at first. She called me from a different number, left a voicemail when I didn't answer. I listened to it with Deo sitting across the room, his arms crossed as if bracing for impact. "Jonas," her voice said, all breathy and sweet, like sugar poured over rust, "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is dramatic. We can fix this. You just need time to cool off. Maybe your new little lawyer is putting ideas in your head." I deleted it without replying. The next day, I received 3 long messages. Then 4. Then 10. Some angry, some pleading. She played every card she could find. Reminders of old memories, weaponized guilt, veiled threats. "You know what my mother will say when this gets out," she wrote in one. "You're trying to ruin my reputation because you can't handle being a man." In another, she said, "Be very careful, Jonas. I have things too. Don't make me use them." I didn't flinch. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I had already lived through the worst version of this. Silence. Disbelief. The slow drip of self-erasure. Compared to that, her desperation now felt like noise. Ms. Mbatha responded officially to her messages with a single legal memo, citing the clauses and evidence submitted. "Going forward, we recommend all communication be through legal representatives," it said. "Direct contact is neither productive nor appropriate." That was the first time Rowena involved her own lawyer, a man named Mr. Adabi, a smooth talker with a talent for misdirection and victim blaming. His response was predictable: accusations of abandonment, claims that I had fabricated financial stress, insinuations that I was unwell, and that Rowena had been supporting me out of compassion. It was the performance I expected, the same one she'd given to friends, to family, to herself, that I was fragile, ungrateful, lucky to have her. But this time, she wasn't talking to someone she could manipulate. She was talking to Ms. Mbatha. At our next meeting, Ms. Mbatha arrived with a printed stack of my evidence: voice recordings, bank transfers I never authorized, email chains with my name scrubbed from business deals she'd intercepted. "Let her play," she said as she reviewed the file, eyes hard behind her glasses. "But we won't flinch. You're not asking for revenge. You're asking for truth. And that's easier to prove than she thinks." I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to say that out loud. The hearing date was set. Preliminary mediation was scheduled first, standard procedure. I knew Rowena would try to twist the narrative, make herself the victim. I prepared myself for it. I rehearsed my story with the therapist Ms. Mbatha connected me to, a quiet woman named Fola who listened more with her eyes than her words. We talked through my past, the things I'd let go, the pieces I still didn't understand. I told her about the envelope on the bus, about how I'd wanted to apologize while in pain, about how I still sometimes felt guilty for getting off that bus, even though it saved my life. Fola didn't try to reframe it with platitudes. She just said, "You're not the one who failed to love. You're the one who started choosing survival." That sentence followed me into mediation. Rowena arrived wearing a cream blazer and minimal makeup, a look I recognized as her reasonable persona. Calm, composed, the victim of a husband who couldn't handle real life. She barely looked at me. When she finally did, her eyes scanned me like I was a bad investment she had once taken a chance on. "You look thin," she said before the session began. Are you eating? I didn't reply. Her concern wasn't real. It was bait. The mediator began, and the back and forth was as exhausting as I'd imagined. Rowena cried at the right times, denied at the right moments. Talked about how she had sacrificed her career to manage my unpredictable lifestyle, and how she only took control of the finances because I wasn't stable. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was rehearsed. Word for word, the script she'd probably planned in her head for years in case I ever dared to speak out. But I had my voice back now. I spoke clearly, calmly. I showed the mediator receipts with my name replaced by hers. Voice recordings where she called me a child who needed to be handled. The screenshots of my accounts being emptied without explanation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shake. I just laid it out. And for the first time, someone official saw it without filtering it through her charm. Rowena's lawyer grew tense. He leaned in toward her, whispered something sharp. She scowled and bit the inside of her cheek. After the session ended, Rowena caught up to me outside the building. You really want to go through with this? She asked, arms crossed, face stony. I looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel the urge to explain or justify or beg her to understand. I almost died, I said. And you were more worried about a bus seat than my life. There's nothing left to fix. She didn't respond, just stood there, blinking. And I walked away, not because I was finished, but because I was finally beginning. The city hadn't changed much, but I had. The noise was the same, the distant honking of Danfoss, the calls of hawkers winding through traffic, the hum of too many lives moving at once, but it no longer overwhelmed me. Maybe because the storm inside me had finally quieted. There was something strange about walking through familiar places with a new kind of silence in your chest. Not the silence of defeat, but the stillness that follows survival. I wasn't looking for him when I saw him again. I had just stepped into the corner store by Deo's place, planning to grab bread and a bottle of malt. It was early evening, and the air had that thick Lagos weight to it, warm and restless. I was halfway through the aisle when I noticed the back of his head, gray and slightly bent, that same dark cap, that same slow, deliberate posture. He was inspecting a loaf of bread like it owed him answers. And even before he turned around, I knew it was him, the old man from the bus. My heart jumped in my chest, not from fear, but from a strange kind of gratitude that tightened my throat unexpectedly. I hadn't thought about what I'd say if I saw him again. I didn't expect to. But there he was, holding bread in one hand, exact change in the other, grumbling softly as he handed it to the cashier. I waited until he stepped outside before following. He moved slower than I remembered. His back was a little more hunched. He walked with the kind of weariness that spoke of decades lived without shortcuts. I caught up to him on the sidewalk, my voice catching slightly before I spoke. Excuse me, sir? He turned, squinting at me, lips pursed. His eyes scanned my face for a few seconds, then widened slightly, recognition dawning like a slow sunrise. You, he said, not quite smiling, but not surprised either. I nodded. Yummy. We stood there, the world passing around us in flashes of heat and movement. For a second, I wondered if I was imposing. If maybe this was something that meant everything to me and almost nothing to him. You spoke up, I said finally. On the bus. That day. He tilted his head. You look like hell, son. Couldn't just stand there. I let out a breath, a small huff of disbelief at how casually he said it. Like what he did hadn't changed something fundamental in me. Like it was normal to throw your voice into someone else's pain and remind the world that dignity still mattered. You saved my life, I said, the words coming easier than I expected. He shook his head immediately. Nah, I just called out foolishness when I saw it. You did the saving part. I wanted to argue, to insist that he'd done more than just call something out, that he had cracked open the illusion I'd been trapped in. That one sentence. He looks like he's dying, and you're worried about a seat, had echoed in my head for weeks. It had been the mirror I didn't know I needed. But instead of explaining all of that, I just said, still, thank you. He studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. You get off that bus in the end? I did. And I made it to the hospital in time. Barely. Had surgery. Recovered. Left her. He nodded again, slower this time. Good. That was all he said. Just good. Like anything more would have cheapened it. And maybe it would have, because there was a power in the simplicity of what he'd done, and even more in how little he asked for in return. He hadn't done it for credit. He'd done it because it was right, and that made it mean even more. We stood there for another moment, the late sun turning the pavement gold around us. "You know," I said, "I used to think that being strong meant staying quiet, enduring. But it doesn't. It's knowing when to speak, when to stand up, or even when to sit down and let people see you hurting." The old man cracked a rare, tired smile. "Takes strength to know your limits. More to stop letting people cross them." He started walking again, and I matched his pace, just for a few steps. "May I ask your name?" I said. "Baba Say," he replied. "People just call me Baba." "Baba," I repeated. "I won't forget that." We reached the corner where our paths would split. He turned to me and gave a nod that felt like the end of something sacred. "Take care of yourself, son. The world won't always remember to do it for you." Then he crossed the street, disappeared into the noise, into the same current of strangers he had once emerged from. I stood there for a long time, and I realized that, sometimes, the loudest rescues come from the quietest voices. That old man didn't raise his hand in protest. He didn't make a speech. He didn't know me. But he had seen me, and in a moment where everyone else turned away, he had turned toward. That was what I remembered most. Not the pain, not the betrayal, but the moment I was reminded I was still human. And in a world that had spent years convincing me otherwise, that one phrase, spoken by a stranger, had been enough to start rebuilding the man I used to be. The apartment isn't big. The couch sags a little in the middle, the kettle whistles too loud when it boils, and the water pressure in the shower plays its own unpredictable symphony. But it's mine. All of it. Every creaking floorboard, every window I open to let the sunlight in, every dish in the drying rack, chosen by me. I wake up now without the invisible weight pressing against my chest. No one asking where I'm going. No one demanding explanations for why I want to take a walk, or spend money, or laugh a little too loud at something on the radio. It's quiet here, but the kind of quiet that feels like peace, not punishment. I kept the chair from Deo's guest room, hauled it with me when I finally signed the lease for my own place. It's nothing special, cheap wood, a faded cushion, but it reminds me of the first room I was allowed to heal in. I sit in it every morning with tea in my hands and the windows open wide, letting in the sounds of a city that, for once, doesn't feel like it's trying to bury me. I don't rush anymore. I don't apologize for taking up space. The business is mine again, too. It took some work, but I got back in touch with old clients, built new relationships, and started taking projects on my terms. No middlemen. No one editing my emails before I send them. I registered the business under my full name, Jonas Emmanuel Vale, and when I received the official documentation in the mail, I held the envelope in my hands longer than I needed to. It wasn't just paperwork. It was reclamation. Of work. Of self. Of pride. Therapy continues. Once a week. Some sessions feel like unraveling knots I didn't know were there. Others are just quiet conversations where I finally get to say out loud the things I used to whisper in the dark. Guilt. Shame. The strange grief of losing a version of life you thought was love. My therapist, Fola, reminds me often that healing doesn't happen in a straight line. That some days I'll feel free, and others I'll still hear Rowena's voice echoing in the places I've yet to dust out. She's right. Sometimes I'll be out grocery shopping and someone will laugh a certain way and my chest will tighten without warning. Sometimes I'll look at the total at the till and instinctively reach for my phone like I need to ask for permission to spend my own money. But those moments pass. I let them pass. I've learned not to chase them or judge them. I just breathe. I return to myself. I've also started reaching back out to the people I let drift. Not all of them. Some doors are better left closed. But others, like my sister Amaka, who I hadn't called in 2 years, were still slightly ajar. When I called her, she cried. Not because I disappeared, but because she thought I wouldn't come back. I knew something was wrong, she whispered. But you stopped letting me see you. We met for lunch the following weekend. Her eyes scanned me the way big sisters do, measuring health in skin tone and posture and the tightness around the eyes. You're lighter, she said, not referring to weight. I nodded, because she was right. I started cooking again too. Simple things. Boiled yam and egg sauce. Spaghetti with too much pepper. Toast with sardines. Food made in silence, for no one but myself. There's something healing in preparing a meal with no audience. No pressure to impress. Just you, your ingredients, and the sound of the oil singing in the pan. And every time I sit at the table, I remember the bus. I remember the way I sat, sweating, broken, clutching a railing while the woman who claimed to love me demanded I give up my seat for her mother. I remember the stairs, the ache, the silence, and then the voice, Babasay's voice, cutting through all of it. He looks like he's dying, and you're worried about a seat? That moment didn't just wake the people on that bus. It woke me. I used to think strength meant standing, pushing through, smiling through the burn. But now I know better. Sometimes strength is staying seated, not rising, not performing, not proving, just sitting. Because your body is screaming and your heart is bleeding, and the people who love you will never ask you to stand in that state. The ones who see you, truly see you, will move the world around you instead of expecting you to move through pain alone. I think about that often when I walk into crowded rooms now. A friend's birthday dinner, a seminar I was invited to speak at last week, a networking event for freelancers. I walk in, and I look for a seat, not to hide, not to disappear, but to exist fully, as I am. No performance, no permission needed, because I am no longer a ghost in my own life. I am here. I choose where I sit. I choose when I stand. And above all, I choose who gets to walk beside me. I haven't seen Rowena since mediation. She tried reaching out once more, some half-hearted attempt to start fresh, but I didn't respond. Some doors need not be slammed, just left unopened long enough to rot off their hinges. My lawyer handled the rest. Clean division, recovery of withheld funds, a signed statement absolving her of future claims in exchange for silence. I don't need to speak about her anymore. Her silence now speaks loud enough. Some nights, I still lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, wondering how I lasted as long as I did. How I let myself shrink so slowly I didn't even notice the erosion. But then I remind myself I got out. I stepped off that bus. I found my breath. I found my voice. And now, I've found something even rarer. Peace. The kind you don't borrow or earn. The kind you keep. So now, when I sit fully. Not in fear. Not in silence. Not in waiting. But in wholeness. In truth. In a life worth sitting down for.